Have you ever wanted to automate posts to Instagram but didn't want to download a third-party app or service for fear of getting blocked? Do you have some experience with JavaScript? If so, then this is the tutorial for you. But first, a little background. Inkydoodle.ml, one of my side projects with my buddy Alex Geloza, is a site that allows you to combine various Inkydoodle characters and create new generations and hybrids of Inkydoodles. This project also has an associated Instagram account that posts a new Inkydoodle character every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. These are posted automatically via a Node.js and Express script. Today I'm going to go through how I wrote it and how you can leverage the power of Node.js and Express for your own Instagram accounts. All of this code will be available in the GitHub repository for Inkydoodle.ml, which can be found in the description of this video. Let's get started. First off, you're going to want to have the latest version of Node installed on your system. I'm on a Mac and I already have it installed, so I'm going to go ahead and open up VS Code, which is my preferred code editor. Next, I'll open up a new terminal and make a new directory called Instagram Poster. I'll cd into that directory and I'm going to create a new package.json file by writing npm init-y to initialize with all default settings. Then I'll open up that folder that I just made to make it my new working folder in VS Code. As we can see, that package.json file is right there. Then I'll open up a new terminal again and install Express with npm iexpress, which is just shorthand for npm install express. While that's running, I'm going to create a new index.js file and work on building a basic Express server. So first, I'm going to import Express by assigning the Express variable to require Express. Then we'll create an app variable that is assigned to the invocation of our Express variable function. Our port is going to be either the port defined in the environment variables or 4000 if that port isn't explicitly defined. Next, we'll have our app listen on our port that we defined earlier and have a callback function that will console log listening on port, and then whatever our port is after that. And there you go. So we have our basic Express server all set up now. We have a node modules folder. We also have an index.js file, a package.lock.json file, and a package.json file. Okay, so next we're going to run npm start. And we have a missing script here, so I'm just going to add that to our package.json file. We're going to say start, and this is going to be node index. So that's going to be our start script, so that Node knows how to run our file. And there you go. When we write npm start, it says listening on port 4000. Now, Instagram has this graph API which can be used for content management on business Instagram pages with an endpoint and an access token. However, it doesn't allow non-business accounts to access it. We also see that Instagram only allows users to publish images that are in JPEG format, so we'll keep that in mind for later. We'll instead access our Instagram account with this npm package called Instagram Web API that has a really straightforward implementation. We're going to instantiate a client with a username and password, and then we can use any of these methods on our logged-in client, such as getting photos and anything else you might need. So let's include it in our application. I'm going to assign this Instagram variable to require Instagram Web API. Then we're going to add this npm package to our project's dependencies by running npm install Instagram Web API in the terminal. Then when that finishes installing, I'm going to create a function called Instagram login function in Pascal case. And within this function, I'm going to instantiate a new client variable. Into this new client variable, I'm going to assign this new Instagram import that we've added right here. And this new Instagram import is going to take an object with the keys username and password. And then to the username key, I'm going to assign process.env.instagram username as a value. And to the password key, I'm going to assign process.env.instagram password. Now, since we're using process.env to store our sensitive data in environment variables, we're going to need this .env package initialized in our application. So let's write require.env.config, and then this config method is a function, so we'll invoke it. Next, we're going to install this package by writing npm install.env in the terminal, and then we'll see in the .env file, we can write, for example, Instagram underscore username equals my password, or my username rather, and then for the Instagram password, we'll say equals my password without any spaces. Then Node will note to substitute our process.env variables written in our app with whatever is in our .env file, and won't expose our sensitive data. Keep in mind that the environment variables will only be substituted after you restart your project. So now let's create a new function called Instagram post picture function that will be asynchronous. So we're going to write await client. And since we're using await syntax here, we also need this async statement right before the parentheses here. We're going to say await client dot get. We're going to say get photos by username. And this will take a parameter. It's going to be an object with the key of username. And the value is going to be process.env.instagram username. So we'll copy that and paste it right here. And then we're going to write dot then. So when we say dot then, we mean when this first promise resolves. Let's take the result and let's go ahead and console log it. Then let's invoke the post picture function, the Instagram post picture function. And let's also invoke the main Instagram login function that we've been writing. Now, after restarting our app, if we write npm start in our terminal, we'll first see listening on port 4000, and then after a short delay, we'll see this result object in the console. Now, let's use that result to extrapolate our latest posts by writing res. We'll say res.user.edgeowner. I'm going to copy this edge owner to timeline media, and we'll say .edges. Then to grab the caption of each post, and this object traversal here I figured out ahead of time, we're going to map over each edge and write, we'll say edge.node.edgeMedia. We'll say edge media to caption. Then we'll say dot edges, which is an array. So we'll grab the first index of that array and then write dot, we'll say dot node dot text. And then this will give us an array of every post caption. So to grab the most recent post caption, we'll just return the 0th index here. And now we have our most recent caption. So each Inky Doodle has a numerical ID number that starts off every caption. So for every future post, we're going to grab the previous ID number, if there is one, and add 1 to it. We'll do that by grabbing the most recent caption. We're going to split that string into an array and then access the first index. We're going to split it along this dash here. We'll split it along the dash, and we'll grab that first index, and that first index will be a string representation. So we'll manipulate it to a number by wrapping it with this number wrapping object. And then now that we have the latest number, all we have to do is add 1 to it, basically, to get the updated ID of the new Inky Doodle that we're going to post. So we're going to do, create a new variable called updated number. It'll take the latest number and then just add 1. So now I'd like to integrate Contentful into our application. Contentful is a content platform that allows you to add your own data and assets and easily query and manipulate them. If you don't have an account, you can sign up on their website. I already have an account with Inky Doodle Assets, so I'm going to log in with my GitHub. On the Contentful dashboard, you'll see all of your project's entries. If you click on Content Model, you'll see some default data model types along with any custom data models you've made. You'll see the Inky Doodle model has 8 possible fields with various field types that I can query. So if we go back to the dashboard and click on any Inky Doodle, we can see what that looks like when the fields are filled out. Okay, we can perform queries on our data using GraphQL's Content API. Contentful has some great documentation on that, as well as a demo graphical interface if you'd like to check it out and see what that looks like. So now that we have our latest Inky Doodle ID number, let's put it to use by creating a new constant variable called Inky Doodle Query and setting that to a GraphQL template literal query string. We're going to write query and then curly brackets. We'll write Inky Doodle Collection, which is our Contentful collection name. We're going to filter our query by writing where, open brackets, the number is equal to the updated number variable that we've already figured out before by adding 1 to the latest number. And we're going to close that off and open up another set of curly brackets within which we'll grab the desired items, which will have the following fields as we've already seen on our Inky Doodle Contentful model. It'll have the number, the generation, the name, the parents, and an image within which we are going to grab the image's URL. Okay, so there we have it. That's going to be our Inky Doodle query. So now for our app, to actually talk to the Contentful API, we're going to use Axios, which is a promise-based HTTP client for the web. We're going to import it by running npm install Axios in the terminal, and then at the top of our application, assigning the Axios variable to require Axios. And we'll use it like so. After the Inky Doodle query, let's invoke the Axios function, and within it, let's write an object with a URL key that is going to have the value of our Contentful endpoint. And then after the space field in that endpoint, you'll enter in your own Contentful space ID as an environment variable. I've entered mine as process.env.contentful space ID. You can find that in your Contentful settings. Then the object's method key will have a value of post. Since client requests are all HTTP post requests in GraphQL applications, we'll add a headers key with an object that will have a content type of application/JSON. We'll also send an additional authorization header that will include a token that reads bearer, followed by our Contentful access token in an environment variable. Mine reads process.env.contentful access token. Then the payload or the data that we're sending via Axios to Contentful will be an object with a query containing the Inky Doodle query variable that we wrote a little bit earlier. Next, after this first promise resolves and we receive a response from Contentful's endpoint, let's say .then let's take that result and get the data from it by writing res.data. Then, when this second promise resolves, let's destructure this result object into data and errors. If we have any errors, let's go ahead and console.error them. If not, we'll create an updated Inky Doodle constant variable that will be assigned to data.inkydoodlecollection.items, which will be an array. So we'll grab the item at index 0 of that array. If the updated Inky Doodle variable is truthy, I'll create an updated caption variable and assign it to the following template literal string that will contain the Inky Doodle's updated number, name, parents, generation, and any hashtags that I may want to add. Now that we have our caption, let's work with processing our image. For this, let's use an npm package called Jimp, short for JavaScript Image Manipulation Program, that was built for Node. This package has a straightforward implementation, great documentation, and a ton of processing and compression methods that you can run on any image. These methods came in really handy when other image compression packages were causing color degradation issues for me during a lossy compression stage. Let's import Jimp by writing npm install Jimp in the terminal. Then, while that's running, let's assign the Jimp variable to require Jimp. Then let's use Jimp by writing Jimp.read, which will take an argument of our updated InkyDoodle's image URL, which, as you may recall, we get from our Contentful GraphQL query up here. Then, after that first promise resolves, let's write .then. We're going to take something called a lena, and we're going to return the lena with some methods on it. Now, if you're curious what a lena is, it's a standard test image of Playboy model Lena Forsen, made in 1972, used to test image processing and compression algorithms. I won't be using a picture of a Playboy model to test out Jimp, however, but rather a picture of an InkyDoodle, which is close enough. Of course, you can name this lena variable whatever you want, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to stick with lena. Next, let's implement Jimp's resize method on the image by writing lena.resize on the original image, which just so happens to be a PNG file in this case. This resize method uses a bilinear method by default, the first parameter defining the width and the second one defining the height. It also takes an optional third parameter where you can pass in a particular resizing algorithm. For InkyDoodle posts, I found the ideal sizing to be 405 width, 405 height, and a resizing algorithm of Jimp.resize nearest neighbor, which prevents any color degradation during the compression process and preserves the crispness of the image. Then, I will use the quality method to set the quality to 100, and then use the write method to create a local file in the same directory as index.js, which just so happens to be the root directory, and call it by the InkyDoodle's name.jpg, which is important, as you may recall earlier that Instagram only allows JPEG images to be posted. And then this write method also takes a second optional parameter, which is a callback, that will be called after the new file has been written. Next, we'll say await client. And again, since we're using async await syntax here, we'll need an async statement before the function here. We'll use the Instagram Web API's upload photo method on the Instagram client, which will take an object parameter. We'll set the photo key of that object to the value of our updated InkyDoodle name. This will be the local JPEG file that we have. We'll also set the caption key to our updated caption. And finally, we'll set the post key to feed, since we want to target our Instagram feed rather than create an Instagram story. If you do want to create an Instagram story, just set this post key to the string story. Now, after the upload photo promise resolves and we have successfully uploaded a photo to Instagram, we'll add a .then here and destructure the result object to grab this media object here, which will include the ID of our post, and allow us to grab the full Instagram URL of that post. We'll do that by console logging the template literal string, https www.instagram.com/p/ and then we're going to add media.code. Next, after we've grabbed the Instagram URL, let's do some cleanup here and use the file system module from Node. This comes with Node out of the box, so we don't have to download anything from npm in the terminal. But you do have to import fs and declare the fs variable at the top of your application. So next we'll say fs for file system.unlinksync, which is a method that will delete a local file, and we'll pass in the parameter of the updated InkyDoodle name, all right, .jpg, to tell the file system to get rid of that local image since we don't have any use for it anymore. And now finally, let's add a .catch here, which will catch any errors that might come up during this promise chain, and go ahead and console log them. Now that we have the basic Instagram posting function, let's console log logging in, and then we're going to use the Instagram Web API to log the Instagram client in with the login method, And since this method is asynchronous, we'll use the async await syntax here. Let's also add the async keyword at the very top of this function. Then, after the client successfully logs in, let's console log login successful. Afterwards, since the Instagram post picture function is also asynchronous, we'll add the await keyword before its invocation. Now we'll introduce CRON to our application to schedule Instagram posts. If you're not familiar with CRON or cron jobs, it essentially allows users to schedule jobs to run at specific times or time intervals. You can play around with various syntax configurations for CRON with this cron tab guru tool online. To use cron with Node, we're going to use this node cron npm package and its schedule method, which takes a cron syntax string as a first parameter and a callback function as a second parameter. Now all we have to do is run npm install node-cron in the terminal, and then while that's running, assign the cron variable to require node cron. Then, let's use node cron by writing cron.schedule above our Instagram login function here. In this case, since I want this function to run every day at 4 p.m., I'm going to be writing 1600 hours in military time in cron syntax for the schedule method's first parameter here, and then have the entire Instagram login function be enclosed in cron.schedule's callback function. Now, since the Instagram login function is asynchronous, I'm going to add await before the Instagram login function's invocation, and finally, add an async keyword before the callback function. At this point, we've completed the basics of our automated posting function. Let's cover some edge cases as well. If for some reason your Instagram account is under extra scrutiny and the IP address of wherever you're hosting the script is not recognized, Instagram might block Instagram Web API's attempt to log into your account. It is then possible to bypass the block and confirm the user's identity by asking Instagram to send a security code by text or email and confirming the code. We'll cover how to do that with our express script in a moment. First, let's wrap our login attempt in a try-catch block. We'll try logging in with our client, and if it's successful, we'll see a console log of login successful, and then our Instagram post picture function will run. Otherwise, we'll catch the error and do something with it. In this case, let's first console log login failed. If the error status equals 403, we'll console log throttled, that is, our server is making too many attempts to log in, and return from the function. Now, we can also go ahead and console log the error object to aid in debugging here. Let's also say that if this error object exists, and the value of the message key on it is strictly equal to checkpoint_required, that means that we've been hit with an Instagram challenge. So what we're going to do to solve this challenge is grab this challenge URL variable and assign it to the checkpoint URL of the returned error object. Next, let's await client.updateChallenge, which is a method from the Instagram Web API package that takes an object as a parameter. This object will include the challenge URL and a choice, which can either be 0 for a text challenge or 1, which we'll go with for this example, and the 1 will be an email challenge. Since we need some way to access the email that Instagram sends us, we're going to use this npm package called IMAP-simple, which is just a simpler interface of another package called Node.IMAP that allows you to work with an email client and retrieve messages from a mail server by means of something called IMAP or IMAP, which stands for Internet Message Access Protocol. Let's create a variable called emailConfig and assign it to an empty object for now. In the terminal, we'll run npm install IMAP-simple and then import it by assigning the IMAPs variable at the top of our application here to require IMAP-simple. Now, back to our email config. This object will have a key of IMAP with the value of another object that will have a user key, which will just be a user's email. In this case, I have it in my environment variables. The object will also have a password key, the value of which will also be stored in the environment variables in this case. The object will also have a host key, which, since I'm using Gmail as my email client, will be the string imap.gmail.com. It'll have a port key with the value of 993, which denotes the incoming mail server encrypted port and allows to connect securely using IMAP. Next, we'll have TLS, which stands for Transport Layer Security. We'll set that to true. Then, let's set some TLS options. We'll have an object here with the keys of server name, which will once again be imap.gmail.com. Then reject unauthorize, we'll set that to false. Since I'll be using a server with a self-signed certificate, it'll be rejected by Gmail outright if this TLS option isn't set to false. And finally, let's set the auth timeout key on the IMAP object to 30 seconds in case of inactivity. Now, let's initialize the IMAP connection by writing imaps.connect, which is a method that will take the email config as an argument. Then, let's take that connection object and return it. We'll use the method openBox to open up our inbox. Then, let's create a delay variable, which we'll assign to 1 times 3600 times 1000. This amounts to an hour. Next, let's create a last hour variable. This will be created with let instead of const, since we'll be manipulating it directly. This will be assigned to a new date object. Next, let's run the setTime method on the last hour variable to set the time to the current time minus delay, which, as we've said before, is 1 hour. Now, let's assign last hour to itself, only we'll convert it to an ISO string. Now that we have the time an hour ago, we can use it by creating a search criteria variable and assigning it to an array. In index 0, we'll be writing the string all in capital letters. In index 1, we'll write since in capital letters, and finally in index 2, we'll include the last hour variable. Next, we'll create a fetch options variable and assign it to an object with the key of bodies that has a value of an array containing an empty string. Now, the reason we've created these variables is so that we can access all the emails that we've received in the past hour. Let's return connection.search, which will take the search criteria variable as the first parameter and the fetch options variable as the second parameter. Then, let's take any resulting email messages that we resolve from that promise and begin parsing them. For this, I'm going to use an npm package called mail parser. In the documentation for mail parser, we can see that the module exports this simple parser function, which is the easiest way to parse emails, and all we have to do is provide a source and maybe some options if we want. To construct each message item source, first, let's create a new variable called all and assign it to _.find, which is a method from the Lodash library. We'll import that in just a moment. The first parameter will be item.parts, and the second parameter will be an object with a key of which and the value of empty string, since we'd like to grab all the message items parts. Next, let's import the Lodash package by writing npm install Lodash in the terminal, and then import Lodash by assigning the underscore variable to require Lodash. Now, let's initialize the variable ID and set that to item.attributes.uid. Then, we'll create an ID header variable and assign that to imap-id, and then leave a space there, plus the ID variable above, plus \r, or the carriage return character, which goes to the beginning of the line, and \n, which is the new line character. Next, let's install the mail parser package by writing npm install mail parser in the terminal. Then, let's import it into our app by assigning the simple parser variable to require mail parser dot simple parser. Now, we can use the simple parser by writing simple parser and then adding the source parameter first, which is the ID header plus all.body, Simple parser also takes a second callback argument. In this case, it will be asynchronous, so we'll add an async statement. We'll receive either an error response or a mail response here. If we receive an error, let's go ahead and console log that error. Otherwise, let's first console log the subject of the mail. Next, and this is the main reason that we set up this email client in the first place, we'll initialize this answer code array variable and assign it to mail.text.split along any new lines. And then let's filter the resulting array for items that are truthy and contain one or more items that are anything but a whitespace character and are digits. We'll further narrow it down by saying if mail.text.includes Instagram, then if the answer code array length is greater than 0, we'll create an answer code variable and assign it to the first index of the answer code array, giving us our answer code in string format. With your answer code string in hand, let's update the challenge by writing await client.updateChallenge and passing it an object parameter with the challenge URL key, an associated variable value, and a security code key with an associated answer code variable value. After this challenge is updated, let's console log the template literal string answered Instagram security challenge with answer code, and then whatever our answer code is. Now that we've successfully passed the challenge, we can log the client in again by writing await client.login, and then attempt to post the picture again by writing await Instagram post picture function. Since we want to be sure that our email client first receives the confirmation code before we go parsing for it, let's add a short delay to our email connection here by defining a delayed email function. This will be an asynchronous function that will take a timeout parameter because all of this IMAP logic will be wrapped in a set timeout call that will execute after a variable amount of time. Now, let's await the delayed email function, and although usually Instagram sends the confirmation email right away or after a few seconds, let's just enter in 45 seconds as a parameter to err on the side of caution. Let's now change the cron job time to run at 3:59 p.m. just in case our login function encounters a challenge error, so it has time to solve it and still post at the desired 4 p.m. time. However, since we've changed the cron job time now, we also have to account for a successful login with no errors. If at 3:59 p.m. there are no issues, I'm just going to delay this Instagram post picture function by creating a delayed Instagram post picture function variable. This will again be an asynchronous function that will accept a timeout variable. This timeout variable will be used to determine how long the set timeout will be set for before it asynchronously calls await Instagram post picture function. Then I'm going to write await delayed Instagram post picture function and enter in a delay of 55 seconds if the login is successful. At this point, we can add some additional features to get this Instagram function ready for deployment. We can add a proxy to the new Instagram object here in the second options object parameter. We'll define the language as n-us and a proxy that will be used only in production mode. I'll be deploying to Heroku for this demo, although you don't have to. Heroku has a ton of different variable IP addresses, which has the potential to cause issues with Instagram. So to combat this, I can use a Heroku plugin called Fixie that will give me a proxy URL to route requests to static IP addresses. Also for Heroku, I'll add a Procfile that tells Heroku how to run my script, which will just contain web node index.js. Before pushing to GitHub or any other source control, don't forget to add a .gitignore file that contains the node modules folder and your .env file so you don't accidentally end up pushing your environment variables. One last feature that I'd like to implement before we check out a demo of this application concerns a feature of the Inkydoodle website where users can search for an Inkydoodle and find the date the Inkydoodle was posted to Instagram and an Instagram link to the actual post. The question is, How do we update Contentful to reflect the Inkydoodle's new Instagram link and the date it was posted? The answer is Contentful's Content Management API, which is separate from Contentful's Content Delivery API and allows you to have write permissions as well as read permissions and requires a separate content management access token. To use the API in our application, we'll be using this NPM package called Contentful Management, which allows you to instantiate a Contentful client and then access and manipulate your Contentful space with a promise-based approach. Let's first install the Contentful Management package by writing npm install contentful-management in our terminal. Then, at the top of our application, let's assign the Contentful variable to require Contentful Management. We'll implement it right after we post our picture to Instagram and receive a media object in the resolve promise. Let's instantiate a Contentful client variable and assign it to contentful.createClient. This method will take an object that will contain an access token equal to your Contentful Management token. Again, this token is different than the token you used for the Contentful Content Delivery API, so keep that in mind. Next, we'll say contentfulclient.getSpace and then enter in your Contentful space ID as the argument to this method. I have mine in my environment variables. Then, let's take that space and we'll use the getEnvironment method to get the master environment, which is the default environment since every Contentful space is required to have at least one environment. Then, let's take that environment and use the getEntry method. Here, we're going to need the updated Inkydoodle's unique Contentful sysID value. So we'll go back to our initial Inkydoodle template literal string and amend the GraphQL query to also supply us sys, open brackets, and then ID. Now we're able to get the Inkydoodle's entry using updated Inkydoodle.sys.id. We'll say .then and then take the resulting entry and we'll set entry.fields.instagram to a JSON object. This JSON object includes a n-us key with the value of another object containing a URL set to the new Instagram URL and the date it was posted. For this, we'll be using a package called day.js, which exports a day.js function that can be called to get the current date. It also exports a .format method, which will take a parameter of a valid date formatting string. In this case, we want the month and the date first, followed by the year. If you've used the moment package before, day.js is very similar. It's just a way smaller package. Run npm install day.js in the terminal and import it into your application by assigning the day.js variable to require day.js at the top. Now we'll run entry.update and then run environment.getEntry again using our updated Inkydoodle.sys.id as the parameter. Then we'll grab the updated entry, which is only in the draft state in Contentful at this point, not published. So we'll go ahead and run updated entry.publish. At this point, the entry has been published successfully, so we'll go ahead and console log the template literal string entry updated successfully and published. New updated entry Instagram link is $brackets updated entry .fields .instagram n-us.url. That'll wrap up the logic for automating posts to Instagram. Now, let's see it in action. I've already pushed my code to GitHub, although you can use any version control provider, and I've deployed my server to Heroku for demo purposes, although you can also use AWS or any other deployment method you so choose. We see in the Heroku logs that at 3:59 p.m., our script runs and it attempts to log in. However, the login fails soon after, and we see login failed, and this error object that includes a message of checkpoint required and a challenge URL. If your account has previously been blocked or faced some restrictive actions from Instagram, this could happen, but good thing we've written code to handle this edge case. Let's see if our challenge solver works. We see that Instagram has sent us an email that tells us to verify our account because someone tried to log into our Instagram account. That's true, our server was trying to log in. This is good because now we have an access code to use when mail parser parses the email. Let's wait and see if our script parses that Instagram access code successfully. A short while later, we see the answer code in the logs and that the challenge was answered using that answer code. Excellent. Final stretch. Let's wait and see if the Instagram post function runs successfully. Will it post? 4 o'clock, we get the Instagram link in our logs and a refresh shows that it does indeed post. Great success. We can see the emails from Instagram here containing the access code and a successful new login confirmation. And that'll do it for this tutorial. If you've stuck it out this far, I'm honestly impressed. Thank you very much. If you like the video, leave a comment or a like. If you want to find out more about InkyDoodle, visit www.inkydoodle.ml or visit the InkyDoodle GitHub page. You can also, of course, follow InkyDoodle on Instagram. The handle is @inkydoodle.ml. We have new InkyDoodles posted every single day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for watching and take care.